What is up, dudes and dudettes in the internet? My name's Scyushi and we are back again some more Genshin Impact. Today we're going to be talking about the three main different builds that you can end up using with Kazuha. Now the thing that I love about this character is that you can use him both as a main DPS, that's what I do, but most people are going to end up using him as a support DPS, in which case all of the builds that we're going to talk about today are going to be completely viable, save for the artifact sets are going to change around a little bit. Now before we get started, I do gotta let you guys know that I am rocking my Kazuha at Constellations 6, and I do have my talents completely maxed out, okay? That said, I spent hours upon hours trying all of this stuff out with his talents at level 6 and his constellation at 0, and I can let you guys know that all of this ends up working out perfectly fine for you if you are kind of a free-to-play or a slightly paying character playing this game and you have his stats considerably lower. Basically, the only difference between you and me is that my Kazuha is going to end up hitting a lot harder than you, and of course, with my higher constellation, more particularly his C1, it makes it so that when you use his ultimate ability, it refreshes his E ability, so you can use it a lot more often, right? So that's most of all the biggest thing that I would say is going to end up being the defining difference, because otherwise his C2 makes it so that his ult gives you more elemental mastery, which of course ends up giving him free damage. His C4 just makes it so that he charges his ult faster, and his C6 infuses his basic attacks with Anemo. That said, I'm still going to end up explaining things to you guys watching as if you're at C0. I will have timestamps so you guys can skip to any portion of the video that you are more interested in. Now, without further ado, let's talk about the main DPS build. So main DPS on this guy, obviously you still want to have your crit rate and crit damage at a considerable amount. Your elemental mastery, you do actually want to have up on this guy anywhere around 500, and you'll be... that's the golden number, because anything over that isn't going to end up scaling as high as crit damage usually does. And then of course you want to have the Anemo bonus as well. So what we're rocking is the battle pass sword, the black sword, which is a considerably good 4-star sword, which of course you can end up varying this up with whatever you want, but I'm using this because it's got the crit rate and it's the only crit rate sword that I currently have. Ignore the fact that I have his 5-star sword, we'll talk about that another time. The artifacts, I'm going to end up using a 2-piece Wanderer, 2-piece Gladiator. The only difference between you and me, though, is that if you're using this guy as a support DPS rather than a main DPS, you can end up swapping Wanderers out for Venerer, the Anemo set, or either a 2-piece or a full 4-piece, because of course the 4-piece Venerer set is going to end up increasing your swirl damage by 60% and decrease an opponent's elemental resistance to the element infused by the swirl for 10 seconds. So that's basically how you'll end up using him as a support DPS, because you'll be having him absorb one of the elements of your other teammates that you tagged an enemy with, or just an element that's out in the open world or reaction or whatever, specifically to end up lowering the resistance of your opponent. But if you're using him as a DPS, Wanderer, Troop, and Gladiator end up scaling better for him. So for our Sands, we're using Elemental Mastery, which I know seems odd, but I mean, Elemental Mastery does go burr on this guy. For the Goblet, we're using the Anemo damage bonus. You pretty much can't swap this out, because the Anemo damage bonus is always going to end up being like the brunt of his attacks, even if you are still building him around the elemental absorption. The swirl itself is going to end up being dependent on the Anemo damage. And then for the helmet, we're actually rocking a crit damage helmet, just because once again we're using the crit damage sword. Sorry, the crit rate sword. Okay, so let's just do a quick little fight right here. Of course, I'm going to be having most of the highlighted damage be Kazuha, so I'm just trying to tag him. The reason I ended up using my Albedo ultimate ability, though, was so that I end up having more elemental reaction, because it's going to end up giving me 125 free elemental mastery. So let's also get these down on the ground again, even though right now I'm not actually doing any elemental reactions, but I am still tagging him with all of my swirl effects and stuff like that, just because of the fact that once again I have him at C6. So all you gotta do is just consider that your damage numbers are going to be a lot less than mine, just because of the fact that you're not going to be triggering swirl all the time. Can you not teleport around, please? That would be very, very nice of you. So let's actually get our pyro reaction to be going, because this is gonna absolutely destroy him right here. Now I'll end up using my ult as well, which lets me use my E ability again, which, I mean, downplay it a little bit if you're at C0 or whatever. But either way, that was a pretty considerably fast fight. And that is going to highlight his full-on DPS build, which is kind of just a standard build as you would with any other character in the game, save for the fact that your Sans is going to end up having Elemental Mastery. So now we're going to be trying a weirdo build, which is perfectly viable if you're using him as a support DPS, which is full Elemental Mastery. So we're really close to 1000 Elemental Mastery. And you would think that this wouldn't work out that well, but it actually works out pretty okay. So long as you... I mean, you're entirely dependent on reactions, but it means that you have consistent damage versus, you know, relying on your crit rate, of course. So we're going to be using Iron Sting because it's the free-to-play sword that you can end up just crafting because it's got, it's easily obtainable for Elemental Mastery. And then, of course, we're just going to end up having Elemental Mastery on our Sans, our Goblet, and our hat, still using the two-piece Wanderer and two-piece Gladiator because, of course, we're highlighting in today's video him as a main DPS, but once again, it would be the exact same thing, just using four-piece Venerer instead, or a mixture of two Venerer or two Gladiator. It's entirely up to you. So now we're going to try out the exact same thing, and I mean, of course, granted, my times might be a little bit different, and of course, I really got to focus on having that elemental reaction because that is going to absolutely destroy so long as it triggers. Oh god, I already don't even have my shield going. Well, I kind of messed that up, but it seems like he's phasing anyway, so it doesn't really super duper matter. But the point is that now I am 100% reliant on using reactions. Okay, so I have to make sure that I get an element that I'm actually triggering off of him. Otherwise, my main damage, like you see that my base attacks are considerably weaker than they were previously. Now, of course, I kind of messed up on the cutscene there and what have you, but I mean, we gotta leave some margin for error, right? That's kind of the whole point. So let's see if we can get this going off, get this going. Gyoba, please. Please, Gyoba, can you actually end up targeting him? All right, well, whatever. Anyways, let's just... We can still end up triggering the Electro reaction, but as you can see, it's not doing as well because of the fact that I am 100% reliant on triggering reactions now, which is kind of the thing that sucks about a full Elemental Mastery build. But, I mean, this is, again, more so if you're using him as a support. It's still perfectly viable. That's kind of the point that I'm trying to get at today, is I'm not trying to tell you like, oh, this build's better than the other one, this one's trash or whatever. All of the ones that we're highlighting today are perfectly viable, but as you can see right there, that kind of forces Kazuha more towards a support DPS rather than a full DPS. So now, last but not least, this is the build that I would probably recommend as a support DPS because your damage is going to be a little bit better. Basically, we've still got high Elemental Mastery. The only thing that I ended up really swapping out, like still using the same sword and still using the same artifact sets, the only difference being is Elemental Mastery, Anemo damage, Elemental Mastery. Because, of course, using your E ability or using your ultimate ability is going to end up benefiting very greatly from having that Anemo damage buff. So this is a really good support build for him. Of course, again, you could use the four-piece Venerer set, but the point is that now we should be doing considerable damage with our Anemo versus before we weren't really doing anything, which obviously this is going to end up having a much bigger impact for me personally because I have him at C6, which means my base attacks are going to be doing Anemo. So you do gotta consider that with this build, your base attacks are still probably not going to end up being very good. That's why I would say that this is a really good support DPS build to end up having high Elemental Mastery because your reactions are going to end up being insane. So hopefully I can keep from getting super duper low with my health this time. Also seems like I kind of messed up there and don't actually have my albedo ability or anything like that. I'm not going to end up using my ult in this phase, even though I technically could. It's just, I don't really want to because I didn't end up doing that the last time. I mean, there I used Zhang Ling's ult, but I shouldn't have just because whatever. But the point is that, you know, now you can see that we're doing considerably more damage just because of the Anemo damage. It's still not going to end up being as good as the full-on, you know, the full-on DPS build that we ended up using on the first time we ended up fighting him. Let me see if I can skip that. Sorry, guys. It's a little bit difficult to commentate while trying to focus on fighting this idiot at the same time. Also, I mean, again, you got to be a little bit lenient with me just because we do have, like, you know, sometimes I'm not phasing him as well and so on and so forth just because I'm not triggering as many reactions or he's screwing around on me or whatever. But now you can see that that was considerably stronger. But again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm personally have him at C6, so I have the Anemo infusion, so obviously it's going to end up affecting me much better, which ultimately means that for everybody else, you guys are going to end up just building him towards the standard DPS build. And now I just want to have a highlight for fun, because this is the build that I've been using on him, where you can see my crit rate's okay, my crit damage is all right, but the point is that my attack is a little bit higher. I'm using his 5-star sword, even though generally speaking, I'd say that a full DPS build would probably end up being better, and then the artifacts are going to end up being pretty much the same 2 sets. However, I'm going to be using attack percentage, Anemo damage, and crit rate, just so that we can end up having that extra damage. And this is kind of a weirdo hybrid that generally seems to be the best build that I found for him. I hope that it's going to end up being as impressive compared to the DPS build. So let's actually get some nice reactions going off at the same time as everything else here. Boing. And oh my god, we've already phased him. Good god. I'm sorry, I'm a little taken aback because I forgot just how powerful this version of him is. I mean, obviously I'm gonna use my ult again just because why not? Just so that we can end up getting through him quicker, because I don't really care. This is kind of the unobtainable, you know. You gotta get really lucky and actually end up getting his 5-star sword in order to have this to work. Oh my god, we got really lucky and didn't have him teleport. Thank you very much. I'm glad that you're just going to stand there and take it this time, even though my reactions are not really as good right now. Oh great, now he's going to teleport. Perfect. I love how he destroys all my geo constructs too. Like, it really makes it difficult to end up doing like damage highlights, especially when he's avoiding. Oh, I didn't know I could pull in Gyoba. Well then, that makes that really nice then, actually. But yeah, see, that's the thing, is it's like now it's kind of a if I crit, it's really, really nice and ends up hitting really hard. But honestly, I'm a little bit disappointed with this 5-star sword. It doesn't seem to scale as well as anything else does. Like, obviously the whole point of this 5-star sword, which kind of separates it from other weapons, is its passive, which is explained extremely poorly. I think basically it gives me around like 36%, if not 46% extra damage or something like that, but it has to end up triggering a bunch of things that it can only end up triggering during certain reactions and so on and so forth. Let's move on though to the team compositions that you can end up using with Kazuha. Obviously the reason that I'm using this team composition is because Zhongli I can never get on my group. Albedo, I just like using his ult because he's going to end up giving me the 125 extra elemental mastery. By having 2 geo characters, it also means that I have Enduring Rock, which means I just have increased damage, also increased shield, and so on and so forth. I like using Zhang Ling just because her ultimate ability can end up being really, really good for tagging multiple enemies out in the field. However, Bennet can end up being a really good character that you can end up using as well. And if you don't have Albert, or if you're looking for a more realistic team composition, you can end up actually using Shorts Kid here. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but ignoring Zhongli, this trinity right here is the big group that everybody keeps using. Obviously, Bennet is... I mean, Bennett's Bennet. He's just going to make you stronger, which is why I generally don't like him, but I have been using him a lot just because he synergizes with Kazuha so well. But the reason why you use Shorts Kid here is because the weird thing with Kazuha is because he ends up doing elemental absorption, what lots of people will do is they'll end up using Shorts Kid to trigger the wet effect, and then they'll end up using Kazuha's ult to end up absorbing the water, tagging enemies and so on and so forth, which means that you could easily swap this kid out for Barbara or something like that. But the point is that you're trying to end up getting all of the enemies tagged in water, and then you're using Bennet so that you can end up infusing your attacks with Kazuha to end up being Pyro. So Kazuha quite literally will be triggering the Vape reaction, which is a really, really powerful reaction of hitting a wet enemy with a Pyro attack, which means that you could easily end up swapping this guy out for somebody that is going to end up using Cryo, for example, so that you could absorb the Cryo in the ultimate ability. The point is, though, that you want to end up using the fire last, because as a priority with elemental absorption, Kazuha is going to absorb Pyro as the highest priority, just because that's pretty much how the game works. I think it goes Pyro, Hydro, Electro, and Cryo is actually like the lowest priority, if I'm not mistaken, which is probably why people are using the Hydro character instead of a Cryo character, because if you're out in the field and there is something to grab ice off of, let's say, or, well, no, let's say more realistically, you're trying to use this team comp so that you want to end up getting Cryo and your ultimate ability with Kazuha, but say there's a pond nearby. Well, good luck. There you go. You just ended up absorbing the water because it has a higher priority than Cryo does. Now, as far as I know, I'm not a Benny expert. I don't really care about this character, but I did get his C6, and that is quite literally where we're getting the Pyro imbue on our weapon. Most people won't end up actually getting Constellation 6 with Bennet if they choose, even if they have the C6, because, of course, Bennet is going to end up being better overall for all of your characters and all of your different builds based on the fact that he's not going to end up imbuing you with Pyro, because of course that means that you have very limited different reactions that you can end up doing. But the interesting thing is that of course the Pyro works perfectly well with Kazuha, and even though I have my Kazuha at C6 where his base attacks become Anemo, this will actually dominate over that. Unlike a character like Xiao, where when you use his ultimate ability, you get Anemo damage, and a C6 Bennet is not going to dominate over that, just because that's how Xiao works. So, speaking of, I've been talking about his constellations this entire video. Let's go through them very, very briefly, even though, of course, you guys could check them out for yourselves. If you can, I'd recommend his C1, just because of course his C1 is going to end up being the most appealing immediately, because it's going to not only reduce the cooldown of your E ability by 10%, which is peanuts, but it's going to make it so that when you use your ultimate ability, you can use your jump attack again. So you can jump, slam, ultimate, jump, slam right after, which ends up increasing his damage quite a bit. His C2 is going to make it so that he gets a free, and everybody else gets a free 200 elemental mastery so long as they're in the bubble that is created by his ultimate ability. His C3, of course, is just going to end up increasing his E abilities damage and level or whatever. His C4, at first I thought that this was pretty useless, but it turns out it's pretty good, because basically it means that I can just spam my E ability while I'm out in the open world and just glide around and stuff like that. And it gets me up to 45 energy, and his ultimate ability is at 60. So the fact that he's an Anemo character means that he's naturally going to generate a lot of particles to end up getting his energy up. So usually what will happen is I'll end up having 15 energy left to end up getting my ultimate ability. All I got to do is like tag one enemy with Anemo, and then I'm already using my ult again. So I can pretty much use my ult every battle with his C4, which is quite surprising, because again, I thought it was going to be pretty bad. His C5 just increases his ult's talent level by 3, and then his C6 is, like I mentioned previously, going to make it so that he has the Anemo infusion. However, it also makes it so that additionally, each point of elemental mastery will increase the damage dealt by his normal charged and plunging attacks, which is why a lot of the builds that I end up showing you guys with elemental mastery work so much better for me. It doesn't mean that it's completely null, okay? For the average player, you're either using a full elemental mastery just for his support capabilities, or a full standard DPS build, which is probably going to end up being your best bet, as we mentioned and as we showed when we're fighting Childe. Now, in terms of the order of talent that you want to end up leveling up, again, that depends on what you're using him for. If you're using him as a support, probably just your ultimate, because that's going to be what is not only absorbing elements and dishing them out, but you can pop this out and then swap back to another character while this is doing things. However, if you want to use him a little bit more damage wise, or even a full DPS, then you probably want to prioritize his E ability then his ultimate ability, and his base attack is pretty much always going to end up being the last priority, unless again you're trying to get him full DPS. But even then, I'd still recommend that you try to keep his E ability at the highest quality, or highest level, I should say, not quality, just because it's going to end up being the ability that you use more than like anything, including your ultimate ability. So maybe if you're a full DPS, maybe your E ability, your base attacks, and then your ultimate, just because the ultimate, though a very powerful ability, it doesn't scale as well as you would think compared to his other skills. And that about should do it, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully this was a good enough example for you guys to know where you should end up building this guy. I'm still experimenting myself and trying things out, and listening, of course, to other player feedback to see how I should end up building this guy, and so on and so forth. The thing that I am kind of disappointed by, and I'll openly admit that, is I ended up getting really lucky in getting his 5-star sword, but unless the passive ability, like the sub ability right down here, unless that triggers, it's still better for me to just have like a normal standard DPS build. And that's disappointing, dude, because this 5-star sword, like, I'll admit it kind of sucks. I wish it didn't. I really, really wish that it didn't. But I mean, the numbers don't lie. Like, we're doing way more damage when we just have a full DPS build. But hey, there you go. Maybe it saves you some bucks because maybe you were planning on rolling on the weapon banner. Don't do it, okay? It's not worth it. You know what is worth it? If you ended up having the 5-star Jade sword. That's basically a stronger version of the black sword. That thing ends up being great on him, and I wish that I had it. But player trading's not a thing. Anyways, thanks for watching, gamers. I don't mean to ramble. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a great day. Bye, guys.